In just a moment, every gaze in first class turned toward Amara Davis. Not because she made a scene, not because she did anything wrong, but simply because she existed as herself, a black woman in a space many believed she didn't belong. Those stares carried more than mere curiosity, they held an unspoken bias, as if to silently ask, how did she get here? What they didn't know was that this moment would become the beginning of a story that wouldn't just change Amara, it would ripple across an entire system that had stayed silent for far too long. Before we dive into this powerful story, let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you find this story compelling, don't forget to hit subscribe to stay with us for more like this. As Amara stepped into the first-class cabin, she immediately sensed the shift in the air. Every gaze slowly and deliberately turned her way. Perhaps it was her tailored blazer, her polished high heels, or the elegant silk scarf draped lightly over her shoulders. Or perhaps it was simply her, a black woman, moving through a space where many likely believed she didn't belong. An older man in a gray suit sitting by the window lowered his newspaper, his gaze lingering on her just a moment too long, as if trying to determine who she was or why she was here. Further ahead, a middle-aged woman wrapped in a creamy cashmere sweater leaned toward her seatmate, whispering something, her eyes darting back to Amara intermittently. She didn't look directly at her, but her glance, filled with curiosity tinged with judgment, gave away her thoughts. Amara wasn't unfamiliar with looks like these. They were like faint trails of smoke she had walked through her entire life, not overt, not explicit, but always present. A quiet reminder that she could not simply exist in certain spaces without being questioned. Deep down, she understood the true reason for their stares. It was her skin. Her dark skin, the unspoken factor that made people assume she was out of place in a setting like this. Amara didn't return their stares. Instead, she stood tall, her posture perfect, her chin held high as she moved confidently toward her assigned seat in the front row, a seat with a clear, unobstructed view of the airplane window. When she reached her seat, Amara set her elegant leather bag down at her feet and gently placed her iPad on the foldable tray table in front of her. But she could still feel their gazes. They hadn't disappeared. They had merely shifted from her to the things she carried, quietly scanning her belongings as though they might explain why she was here. Amara's fingers glided across the screen of her iPad, opening the presentation she had been working on for weeks. But no matter how much she tried to focus on the task at hand, her attention was pulled by the charged atmosphere around her. Those stares, they didn't speak, but they screamed questions she could hear as clearly as if they'd been said aloud. What's she doing here? Does she really belong in first class? The questions didn't need to be voiced. Amara had heard them all her life, in 100 different ways, from 100 different faces. Amara had just opened the first slide of her presentation when a figure appeared beside her. Laura Bennett, the flight's lead attendant, stood there with a polite but noticeably cool smile. Her mustard yellow uniform was immaculate, giving her an air of professionalism, but the sharpness in her gaze made the interaction feel far from welcoming. "Excuse me, Mom," Laura said, her voice clear but lacking warmth. "I need to check your ticket again." Amara looked up, her expression calm but edged with subtle suspicion. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her tone still courteous. "It's just for verification," Laura replied quickly, brushing off the question as though it were routine. Amara silently reached into her sleek leather bag, pulled out her phone, and opened her airline app. She tilted the screen toward Laura, where her first-class ticket was clearly displayed. Every detail, seat assignment, passenger name, and boarding pass barcode was valid and in order. Laura scrutinized the screen carefully, her eyes lingering far longer than necessary, as if she were trying to find some hidden error. When no discrepancies presented themselves, she reluctantly handed the phone back to Amara, her practiced smile now gone. "First class," Laura confirmed, her voice carrying a faint hesitation. "That's correct," Amara replied, her tone remaining steady, but now tinged with a trace of doubt about Laura's intentions. "Thank you," Laura said curtly before turning on her heel and walking away, leaving behind a tense, uncomfortable atmosphere that seemed to hang over Amara like a cloud. Amara could still feel the eyes of other passengers in first class following her, curious and heavy with unspoken assumptions, but she ignored them. She reopened her presentation on her iPad, took a deep breath, and tried to refocus on the work that had brought her here. However, less than 5 minutes later, Laura returned. This time her posture was rigid, and her tone carried an urgency that hadn't been present before. "Ms. Davis," Laura said, her voice carefully measured, as though she had rehearsed what she was about to say. I need you to come with me for a moment. There's a small issue with your ticket. Amara frowned, her suspicion growing. What issue? My ticket was already verified. We need to recheck the information in our system, Laura replied, her words clipped. If you could just step this way, please. The first-class cabin seemed to fall into complete silence. The curious stares that had already been lingering before now intensified, their weight pressing down on Amara from every angle. She could feel the heat of their attention, their eyes following her every move. Inside her, a quiet humiliation began to simmer, but she forced herself to remain composed. She reached for her leather bag, gently closed her iPad, and stood. Lead the way, she said, her voice low but resolute. Laura led her down the narrow aisle of the first-class cabin toward the galley, a space more secluded, away from the majority of prying eyes. But Amara knew better. The whispers, the judgments, they were still trailing behind her, filling the air with unspoken assumptions. I'm sorry, Laura began, her tone devoid of any real remorse. It seems there's been a mix-up with your ticket. This seat is not appropriate. We'll have to move you to economy. For a moment, Amara froze in place. The words "not appropriate" echoed in her mind, sharp and stinging, like a judgment passed down from someone who didn't even know her. Not appropriate, Amara asked, her voice steady but edged with steel. My ticket is perfectly valid. I don't see any reason for me to be moved. Laura crossed her arms over her chest, her gaze icy and unyielding. If you don't cooperate, we'll have to involve security. The words hit like a slap, their cold finality rattling something deep inside her. But Amara didn't let herself lose control. She inhaled slowly, nodded, and said simply, all right. Amara was escorted to the economy cabin, where she was seated in a cramped middle seat between two other passengers. The space was tight, the air thicker here, more confined. She placed her leather bag beneath the seat in front of her, opened her iPad again, and tried to refocus, but the humiliation clung to her like a shadow. The glances, the whispers, the sheer indignity of being dismissed, none of it had left her. Yet Amara knew that this wasn't just about a seat. This wasn't just about her. This was a symptom of something much larger, something systemic, and she wouldn't, let it slide without accountability. She made a quiet decision, right there in that tight, uncomfortable seat. This moment wasn't going to end here. Sometimes, stepping into a new space means facing stares, doubts, and judgments. But that doesn't mean you don't belong. Walk tall, because you've earned your place, and you deserve to be there. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your take. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to support our channel, where we tell stories that inspire, challenge, and move you. Amara sat silently in the cramped economy seat, feeling the air around her tighten, as if the cabin itself were pressing down on her. Her shoulders could no longer rest comfortably, confined by the narrow seat, and the space between the rows was so tight that her knees almost touched the seat in front of her. Her leather bag, now shoved under the seat ahead, seemed misplaced in this environment, and her iPad, her indispensable tool for work, rested on the flimsy, well-worn tray table. She opened the screen, trying to focus, but it was impossible. Her mind kept replaying the moment, Laura's gaze, her words, the way everything had unfolded. Amara wasn't someone who easily revealed her emotions. She had trained herself to mask her feelings, reminding herself time and again that she didn't owe anyone a glimpse of her vulnerability or anger. But this time, it was harder, so much harder. She couldn't stop the questions from surfacing, no matter how much she tried to push them away. Why? Why did they think I didn't belong? Was it because I didn't look like the other passengers in first class? Was it because I didn't fit the image of who they thought should sit there? The shame clung to her like a second skin, wrapping itself around her no matter how much she tried to shake it off. The weight of it all sat heavy on her chest, pressing her further into the seat until a gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. Is there anything I can get you? A glass of water? A blanket? Amara looked up to see Lily Tran, a young flight attendant with warm eyes and a genuinely kind expression. Unlike Laura, Lily's demeanor carried an air of comfort and sincerity. No, thank you, Amara replied softly, her voice calm but tinged with weariness. Lily smiled, but she didn't leave right away. I'm really sorry for anything that happened earlier. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call me. Amara nodded, a flicker of gratitude passing through her. She wasn't used to kindness in situations like this. It was rare, unexpected even, and it reminded her that not everyone within the system was shaped by bias. As Lily walked away, Amara became aware of the other passengers in economy class. Their gazes had begun to shift toward her. But unlike the stares in first class, these were different. They didn't feel laced with judgment. Instead, they carried curiosity, empathy, and in some cases, quiet discomfort. A young woman sitting 2 seats away glanced at her, her eyes briefly softening with sympathy but saying nothing. Ahead, an older man turned slightly in his seat, his expression thoughtful, as if he wanted to say something but didn't quite know how. Amara lowered her head, trying to ignore the stares, but a part of her still felt their weight pressing heavily on her. 5 minutes later, she opened the email app on her iPad and began drafting a message to her assistant. To Maya Green. Subject: immediate investigation needed. Maya, please gather all relevant information on this airline's policies, particularly regarding their procedures for handling passenger complaints and in-flight incidents. I need to know if there have been similar cases in the past. Additionally, prepare a detailed report on my status as a longtime customer and shareholder. I want this airline to understand that I am not just an ordinary passenger. Thank you, Amara. She hit send, feeling as though she had just laid the first bricks of a larger plan. While Amara sat in economy class, Laura Bennett stepped into the galley, her hands gripping a tray of drinks tightly. Her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as she set the tray down on the counter. Laura wasn't malicious by nature. In fact, she had worked as a flight attendant for 15 years, and, in most situations, prided herself on handling things professionally. But this time, things had spiraled out of control. As she replayed the events in her mind, Laura felt a prick of guilt. She couldn't deny that her decision to ask Amara to leave first class had been influenced, at least in part, by unconscious biases she hadn't realized she carried. I just wanted to keep everything orderly, Laura murmured to herself. But she knew that wasn't entirely true. Deep down, she felt she had been wrong, but now she had no idea how to make it right. The crackle of the radio on her shoulder interrupted her thoughts. Laura, there's a message from leadership. They need you to head to economy to address the situation with passenger Davis. Laura's chest tightened. She took a long, steadying breath, trying to maintain her outward composure, but her steps felt heavier as she made her way toward the economy cabin. When Laura reappeared in front of Amara, her movements were stiff, and she carried a glass of water in her hand. Miss Davis, Laura began, her tone formal but devoid of warmth. I want to extend my apologies for the earlier misunderstanding. It was an unfortunate mistake, and I hope you can accept this as a gesture of our regret. Amara looked up from her iPad, her gaze calm but sharp. She didn't reach for the glass of water Laura offered. Instead, her voice was measured but firm. Thank you, she said. But I think this issue requires more than an apology and a glass of water. The air between them felt charged, the tension palpable. Nearby passengers, though pretending not to listen, tilted their heads ever so slightly, their curiosity clearly piqued by the exchange. Laura stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say next. Finally, she stepped back and walked away, leaving Amara with a distinct sense that, for the first time, she was starting to regain some control over the situation. Amara leaned back in her seat, not in humiliation, but in a state of heightened focus. She realized that this wasn't just a minor misunderstanding between her and Laura. This was emblematic of a much larger issue, one rooted in a system that had allowed such actions to occur in the first place. She didn't know exactly what would happen when the plane landed, but she was certain of one thing: this was not the end. This was only the beginning. Amara gazed out the small window in the economy cabin, her eyes following the layers of white clouds drifting by. But her mind was far from peaceful, unlike the serene view outside. Laura Bennett's words echoed relentlessly in her head: this seat is not appropriate. Those words weren't just an insult. They were a quiet assertion that she didn't belong. But Amara was not just a passenger. She was a woman who had fought through countless obstacles to assert her value, and she wasn't going to let this be swept under the rug as just a misunderstanding. Amara pulled out her iPad again, opened the Notes app, and began sketching out a plan in her mind. This wasn't the first time she had encountered implicit bias, but this time she wanted to push further. The system needs to be held accountable, she typed, the words appearing on the screen short but loaded with resolve. Amara resolved that as soon as the plane landed, she would contact her legal and communications teams. This was no longer just about her, it was about everyone like her who had ever been humiliated simply because others couldn't see past their own narrow-minded prejudices. A small voice pulled her out of her thoughts. "Are you okay?" "Yeah." Amara turned and met the gaze of the woman sitting beside her. She was a middle-aged woman with gently curled hair and a sincere expression. "I'm fine," Amara replied, her tone calm though still carrying the weight of her emotions. The woman leaned in slightly, as if debating whether to say more. Finally she spoke. "I saw what happened earlier. I don't know exactly what it was about, but I don't think it should have happened." Amara looked at the woman, sensing genuine concern in her words. For a brief moment she felt a flicker of comfort, reminded that not everyone was indifferent or judgmental. "Thank you," Amara said, offering a faint but appreciative smile. "But this isn't over." The woman nodded, a glimmer of hope flashing in her eyes, as if silently rooting for Amara. Meanwhile, back in the galley, Laura Bennett held a small radio in her hand, her grip tight as she tried to keep her voice steady while receiving instructions from the airline's management team. Her usual air of control had begun to crack. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and the tension on the other end of the line only added to her growing unease. "We've received a direct complaint from passenger Amara Davis," the voice crackled over the radio, cold and authoritative. "She is a longtime VIP customer and a minority shareholder in the airline. You need to address this situation immediately and issue an appropriate apology." Laura's chest tightened. "A shareholder?" She had no idea. "Yes." "Understood," Laura replied curtly. Turning off the radio, she leaned against the wall of the galley, feeling the full weight of the situation bearing down on her. This time, there was no mistake she could blame. Back inside the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Passengers were murmuring louder now, and their curious glances had transformed into quiet outrage. Word of the incident had spread. Some overheard fragments from the crew, others pieced together the situation from what they'd observed. A young man seated behind Amara leaned toward his travel companion, whispering, "She got moved down here because of her skin color? That's disgusting." An older woman nearby shook her head in frustration. "This airline needs to be held accountable. They can't let this happen again." Amara didn't turn around, but she heard every word. Each whisper, each comment, fueled her resolve. A few minutes later, Laura reappeared, her demeanor entirely different from before. Gone was the smugness, the cool indifference. Instead, her expression was filled with worry and discomfort, her steps hesitant. "Miss Davis," Laura began, her voice softer and more subdued than it had been earlier. "I deeply apologize for what happened. This was my mistake, and I hope you can accept my apology." Amara looked up, her gaze steady and piercing, yet calm. "I appreciate that you've come to apologize," Amara replied. "But this isn't just about you and me. I expect the airline to take responsibility and make changes so that no one else has to experience what I did." Laura stood there, silent. She knew Amara was right, and that knowledge gnawed at her more than anything else. A sudden voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We apologize for the inconvenience that has occurred on this flight. Please rest assured that all passengers will be treated with respect and professionalism for the remainder of the journey." No one said it outright, but everyone on the plane knew the announcement was directed at what had just happened. Amara leaned back in her seat, but this time she didn't feel diminished. Instead, she felt the faintest shift in power. It was a small moment, but it had begun. As Amara gazed out the cabin window, watching the clouds roll by, she knew this wouldn't end here. A single stone had been cast into a still pond, and the ripples were starting to spread. Those ripples weren't just the echoes of the injustice she had endured. They carried the hope that she could turn this moment into something greater, not just for herself, but for others who had been silenced by invisible biases. Quietly, Amara typed one final message to her assistant. "Make sure this gets the attention it deserves. Schedule a meeting with the airline's executive board as soon as we land. This is only the beginning." Every change starts with a single act, a personal story. Never underestimate the power of your own actions. Even the smallest steps can ignite a movement far greater than you could imagine. Do you want to be part of the change? Hit like to support this message and subscribe to our channel so you never miss more inspiring stories like this one. Amara sat quietly in the cramped economy seat, but her mind was ablaze. The captain's announcement had confirmed what she already suspected: her actions were beginning to have an impact. But this wasn't just about a perfunctory apology or a public statement. She needed more. In fact, picking up her iPad, she scrolled through her email inbox and spotted a new update from her assistant Maya, from Maya Green. Subject: quick update. Amara, I've reached out to a few members of the airline's leadership team. They've been made aware of the situation and are actively addressing it. I've also sent them a summary of your status as a VIP customer and minority shareholder. It seems they're panicking, which works to our advantage. One noteworthy detail: they've requested an immediate meeting as soon as you land. I'll coordinate everything and send you the specifics shortly. Maya. Amara set the iPad down and took a deep breath. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Slowly but surely, the groundwork for something larger was being laid. Yet, even as she maintained her calm exterior, she could feel the weight of the moment pressing heavily on her. Meanwhile, in the galley, Laura Bennett sat down on a small folding chair, her hands gripping the edge of the table tightly. In her 15 years as a flight attendant, she had never felt tension like this. The crackle of the radio broke the silence again. Laura, you'll need to meet with the captain after the flight. Leadership is requesting a full report from you immediately. The words cut through her like a knife. Laura knew she had made a mistake, and now the consequences of that mistake were bearing down on her. She tried to steady herself, whispering under her breath, "I didn't mean any harm. I was just trying to follow protocol." But deep down, Laura knew that wasn't the whole truth. The image of Amara standing before her, calm yet resolute, lingered in her mind, forcing her to confront the reality of her actions. What she had done wasn't just a mistake. It was the result of the unconscious biases she had carried with her throughout her career. A creeping sense of guilt began to take hold, but it was quickly overshadowed by fear. What if I lose my job? She thought. What if the career I've spent 20 years building falls apart because of one poor decision? The question swirled in her mind, but no answers came. All Laura could do was brace herself for the storm she knew was coming. In the cabin, the tension was still palpable. The passengers around Amara continued to whisper about the incident. Some expressed sympathy, while others, particularly a few seated in first class, were visibly annoyed that the situation was dragging on. "Why don't they just put an end to this already?" a woman in first class muttered to her companion. "This is so disruptive." Amara heard the comment, but she didn't turn around. Complaints like that were nothing new to her. Words from people who simply wanted everything to go back to normal as long as it didn't affect their comfort. A few rows away, a middle-aged man seated in economy leaned toward her. "Miss Davis, right?" he asked quietly, his tone sincere. Amara nodded. "I just want to say, I'm completely behind you. What happened to you wasn't right." "Thank you," Amara replied, seeing the genuine support in his eyes. Small gestures like that kept her resolve strong. It reminded her that she wasn't fighting this battle alone. A voice came over the intercom again, breaking the low hum of whispers in the cabin. This time it wasn't another generic apology, but a more pointed statement from the captain. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have received guidance from our executive office. The flight crew will be taking the necessary steps to ensure the comfort and priority of all passengers, particularly our VIP customers. Thank you for your patience." The announcement, clearly directed at Amara, brought the cabin to an almost complete silence. From the galley, Laura could feel the weight of her colleagues' eyes on her, their stares carrying a mix of curiosity and judgment. Amara lifted her head, her eyes focused straight ahead. This was a small victory, but it was a signal that she had started to regain control of the situation. Lily Tran, the young flight attendant with warm eyes, approached Amara again. "Do you need anything else, Ms. Davis?" Lily asked softly, her voice kind and full of genuine concern. Amara shook her head. "No, thank you. But I truly appreciate your kindness. You've been the only bright spot in what's been a rather unpleasant experience." Lily smiled faintly, but her eyes carried a hint of unease. "I'm really sorry about everything that's happened. I hope things are resolved for you soon." "Thank you, Lily." "So do I," Amara said, her tone softening. Lily nodded and stepped away, but not before leaving a small glimmer of warmth in the otherwise cold atmosphere. Amara glanced down at her iPad, opened a new notes page, and began to write. Change isn't just about apologies. Change is about accountability. And to achieve it, persistence is key. She didn't know exactly how this journey would end, but she knew she had already planted a seed of resistance, a seed of justice, and a seed of justice. and a seed of hope for those who would come after her. Amara sat quietly in the cramped economy seat, her eyes fixed on the iPad screen, though her mind was racing. The notes she had written, her thoughts, ideas, and plans were starting to look more and more like a blueprint for a battle. As the plane continued its journey across the Atlantic, she couldn't stop herself from replaying everything that had happened. Part of her wanted to let it go, to let the flight end and focus on the more pressing work waiting for her in Milan. But she knew that wasn't an option. This wasn't something she could simply walk away from. It had become part of a much larger issue, one she couldn't ignore. In the galley, Laura leaned against the wall, trying to take steady breaths to calm her racing heart. She knew this flight wasn't going to end peacefully, at least, not for her. Laura couldn't stop thinking about what she had done. Amara's words, though not harsh, carried a weight she couldn't shake. The stares from passengers, the whispers, and the pressure from the captain, all of it pierced through the armor of professionalism she'd built over years in her role. She had always thought of herself as a professional, a lead flight attendant who got the job done without letting personal feelings interfere. But this time, she couldn't deny that her actions had been influenced not by policy, but by unconscious bias. This was my mistake, she thought to herself. For the first time in her career, Laura felt the full weight of personal accountability. But the real question was, what would she do to make it right? The atmosphere in the cabin was no longer the same as it had been at the start of the flight. The captain's announcement had sparked a ripple of curiosity and tension among the passengers. In the economy cabin, a small group of passengers began talking amongst themselves, their voices just loud enough for Amara to hear every word. She was clearly discriminated against, a man said, his tone indignant. What year is it, and this is still happening? But what did she do to cause this? A young woman asked in return. Maybe it was just a mistake. The man frowned. A mistake. Things like this don't happen by accident. If she doesn't speak up, who will? Amara listened but didn't turn around. Their words, though not directed at her, gave her strength. Lily Tran moved carefully down the aisle, serving drinks to passengers. But inside, she felt conflicted. She couldn't shake the sense of injustice in the way Laura had handled the situation with Amara. As Lily walked past Amara's seat, she paused. Mess. Davis, Lily said softly, leaning down so no one else could hear. I know this might not mean much, but I want you to know that not everyone on this crew agrees with how this was handled. Amara looked up, her eyes softening for the first time in hours. Thank you, Lily. I really appreciate that. Lily hesitated, as though there was more she wanted to say. Finally, she lowered her voice even further. Do you know what you're going to do after the flight? Amara gave a faint smile. I'm going to make sure this isn't forgotten. But not just for me, for the people who come after me. Lily nodded, her expression showing a flicker of admiration. If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. Amara could feel the sincerity in Lily's words. You've already helped, Lily. Thank you. Lily straightened and walked away. But the brief exchange left Amara with a renewed sense of hope that even within systems riddled with injustice, there were still individuals willing to stand for what was right. As the flight continued its path toward Europe, Amara's iPad buzzed lightly, alerting her to a new email. She opened it, and the subject line immediately caught her attention. From Airline Executive Office. Subject: official apology from the executive team. The email was brief but to the point. Dear MS. Davis, we extend our deepest apologies for the events that occurred on your flight. This is not the experience we strive to provide for any of our passengers. We are conducting a thorough investigation into the matter and are committed to addressing it comprehensively. Additionally, we have instructed the flight crew to cooperate fully and ensure your comfort for the remainder of the journey. We would also like to invite you to meet with the executive leadership team upon your arrival in Milan to discuss the necessary measures to ensure that incidents like this never happen again. We deeply regret the inconvenience and distress you have endured. Once again, we sincerely apologize. Sincerely. The Airline Executive Office. Amara read the email, her eyes lingering on the words, we sincerely apologize. She had heard far too many apologies in her life, half-hearted ones. Apologies offered simply to relieve pressure, not because of genuine accountability. But this time, Amara felt something different. This wasn't just an apology. This was a sign that she had shaken the system. Meanwhile, Laura stood near the back of the cabin, watching as Lily moved through the aisle with an air of confidence. She couldn't stop herself from feeling threatened. Laura knew she had been wrong, But now she also felt that things were slipping completely out of her control. She had lost her authority in the cabin and perhaps even within her own team. She glanced at her watch. Just a few hours remained until the flight landed. But for Laura, each minute dragged on as if it were an hour. As the overhead announcement informed passengers that the plane was beginning its descent, everyone started preparing for the final moments of the flight. Yet the tension in the cabin remained thick, like a taut string ready to snap. Amara felt a small weight lift from her chest as the glittering lights of Milan came into view through the window. This wasn't just a destination. This was where she would face the airline's leadership head-on and take this story into its next chapter. Laura, on the other hand, could feel the pressure of every gaze as the plane prepared to touch down. She knew that the situation wouldn't end when the passengers disembarked. For her, this was just the beginning of what could be the end of her career. The journey to creating change is never easy. But if you hold on to patience and determination, the storms you face can become stepping stones to something extraordinary. What do you think about the challenges Amara has faced so far? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to follow the next chapter of her journey. The plane touched down at Milan's Malpensa International Airport with a slight jolt, but the tension inside the cabin remained palpable. The sound of seatbelts clicking open echoed through the aisles as passengers began standing up, reaching for their belongings. Amara stayed seated, her hands resting calmly on the handle of her sleek black leather bag. She wasn't in a hurry. What she was about to do didn't require haste. She knew that the moment she stepped off this plane, she would enter a battle she was ready to face head-on. The passengers around her shuffled out of their seats, many still casting curious glances her way. A few offered small, sympathetic smiles, but no one dared to speak. The woman who had been sitting next to Amara, the one who had quietly voiced her support earlier, looked over one last time. "Good luck," the woman whispered, before standing and blending into the stream of people filing out of the cabin. "We could all use a little luck," Amara replied softly, her tone carrying weight far beyond the words. Near the exit, Laura Bennett stood alongside the other flight attendants, maintaining a professional facade as they bowed slightly and thanked passengers for flying with them. But Laura's composure was fraying at the edges. She knew a confrontation was waiting for her, and her mind churned with unease. Amara was one of the last passengers to rise. She moved slowly but deliberately, stepping into the aisle and making her way toward the door. As she approached, her eyes locked with Laura's. "Ms. Davis," Laura began, her voice faltering. She couldn't finish the sentence. Amara stopped, her gaze steady, piercing. She didn't speak, letting the silence between them fill the space. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was heavier than any words Laura could have uttered. Laura lowered her head slightly, as if she wanted to say more, but before she could, Amara stepped past her without looking back. As Amara crossed the jet bridge and entered the terminal, she immediately noticed something out of the ordinary. Waiting just ahead, near the passenger reception area, were not just the usual airport staff but two men in crisp airline security uniforms. "Ms. Davis," one of the men addressed her, his tone professional but firm. "We've been assigned to escort you to a private meeting room. The airline's executive leadership team is waiting for you." Amara's expression remained calm, but inside, she registered the gravity of the situation. The fact that the leadership team was personally awaiting her arrival wasn't just an apology, it was a clear sign that they were under immense pressure and eager to regain control of the narrative as quickly as possible. She nodded. "Lead the way." In the distance, Amara caught sight of Laura being approached by a group of airline staff. She looked as though she wanted to protest something, but after a moment of hesitation, she quietly followed them down a separate corridor, likely toward a private crew meeting room. The scene left Amara with mixed emotions. Part of her wanted to see Laura held accountable, but another part of her recognized that Laura was just one cog in a much larger machine. The issue wasn't just Laura, it was an entire culture that had allowed biases like hers to take root and thrive. Amara continued walking, not looking back. She knew her story with Laura wasn't entirely over, but for now it was no longer her priority. She was led to a private meeting room in the VIP section of the airport. Inside, the room was sleek and minimalist, with a long conference table, leather chairs, and a large screen mounted on the wall. Waiting for her were 3 men and 1 woman, all dressed in impeccable suits. At the center of the table sat Mark Reynolds, The airline's CEO, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and an expression that was both stern and professional. "Welcome, MS. Davis," Mark said, standing to extend his hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us right after your flight. We understand you've had an uncomfortable experience, and we want to address it immediately." Amara shook his hand, her gaze steady and sharp but polite. "I didn't come here to hear excuses, Mr. Reynolds. I'm here to understand what your airline plans to do to ensure this never happens again." Mark gestured for her to take a seat, and the meeting began without delay. "First and foremost, I want to say that we take full responsibility for this incident," Mark began. "We've reviewed the reports from the flight crew and have received your feedback. What happened on board was unacceptable and does not reflect the values of our airline." "You're right," Amara interrupted, her voice calm but commanding. "This isn't just about me. This is about a system that allowed an employee to believe they had the authority to decide who belongs and who doesn't. This is about your airline taking responsibility not just with words but with action." Mark nodded, his expression serious and thoughtful. "We are already taking several immediate steps, including the suspension of lead attendant Laura Bennett while we conduct a full investigation. Additionally, we are expediting the implementation of mandatory sensitivity and diversity training, effective immediately, for all staff." Amara met his gaze directly. "I want a detailed report on these steps, and I want to ensure that this isn't just a reactionary move to quiet the backlash. I want real change, cultural change." Mark leaned back in his chair, his face reflecting a mixture of resolve and contemplation. "Ms. Davis, I understand what you're asking, and I give you my word that we will do everything in our power to ensure this doesn't happen again. You have every right to demand this, and I will personally oversee the reform process." Amara nodded but kept her stern demeanor. "I'll be watching, and if I see even the slightest indication that your words aren't backed by meaningful action, I won't hesitate to take this public." The tension in the room thickened, but Mark didn't argue. Instead, he raised his hand slightly, a gesture of reassurance and commitment. "You have my word." As the meeting concluded, Amara stepped out of the room feeling a mix of satisfaction and vigilance. This was a significant step forward, but she knew the fight wasn't over yet. The airport hallway was quiet and nearly empty, a stark contrast to the storm of thoughts running through her mind. Amara pulled out her phone and quickly sent a text to her assistant. "Maya, prepare a detailed summary of this meeting. I want everything documented clearly. This is just the beginning." Amara stepped out of the private meeting room at Malpensa Airport, feeling the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the large glass windows. She took a deep breath, the fresh air a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere on the plane. But no matter how refreshing the air was, the weight of what lay ahead pressed firmly on her shoulders. Amara knew the meeting she had just left was only the beginning, and a promise from the airline's leadership would never be enough. The real journey to create lasting change, not just for herself but for others, would be far longer and much more challenging. She sat down on a bench near the taxi pickup area and glanced at her phone. A message from her assistant, Maya, lit up the screen. "Are you done yet? Call me when you can." Amara tapped the call button, and Maya's voice came through almost immediately. "Amara, how did it go? Was the meeting what you expected?" "They made a lot of commitments," Amara said, her tone measured and cautious. "They suspended the lead flight attendant, they're rolling out training programs, and they said they'd be closely overseeing the process. But you know me, Maya. Words are one thing, action is another." Maya chuckled lightly. "Exactly. I've already started preparing the materials to track their promises. We'll keep them on their toes. And if they drop the ball on anything, I'll make sure they get a very loud reminder." Amara felt reassured by Maya's confidence and professionalism. "Thank you, Maya. I trust you completely. Now I need to get ready for tomorrow's meeting with the sponsors. But I don't want this situation to fade into the background, even for a day." "Don't worry," Maya replied firmly. "We're not letting this die down." The taxi carried Amara through Milan's bustling streets. This city had always given her mixed emotions, a place bursting with creative inspiration, but also one where she felt the constant need to stay in fight mode. As the car turned past luxury fashion boutiques and glowing neon signs, Amara found herself thinking about the big event tomorrow, the unveiling of her new collection. It was a moment she had spent months preparing for, her passion project, her dream realized. And yet, it now felt overshadowed by the weight of what had happened on the flight. She wondered if she could fully immerse herself in her work when part of her mind was still consumed by this battle with the airline. But then she reminded herself, "I've overcome bigger things than this," she thought. "I can do both." Meanwhile, in a separate private meeting room at the airport, Laura Bennett sat across from a panel of airline supervisors. A series of questions about her actions during the flight loomed in the air, and the tension in the room was suffocating. "Miss Bennett," one of the supervisors began, his tone devoid of emotion, "can you explain your decision to move Ms. Amara Davis to the economy cabin?" Laura exhaled heavily, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "I believe there was a mix-up with the seating assignment, and I just wanted to resolve the situation as quickly as possible." "You didn't verify the information before asking her to vacate her seat?" No," Laura admitted, her voice faltering. "I didn't. I realize now that I made a mistake." The words caught in her throat, almost too heavy to say aloud. She saw the judgmental stares from the supervisors across the table, and it hit her this wasn't a discussion, it was a verdict. "Are you aware that Ms. Davis is not only a VIP passenger but also a shareholder in the airline?" another supervisor asked pointedly. Laura couldn't respond. She lowered her head, the gravity of her actions sinking in deeper with each passing second. "The results of this investigation will be forwarded to the executive leadership," the final supervisor said as he rose from his chair. "You will be informed of the outcome." Laura sat alone in the now empty room, her thoughts swirling between regret and fear. She had built her career over 15 years, but now it felt like it was unraveling in a single day. Later that evening, Amara received an email notification from the airline's executive team. It was a formal statement addressed not just to her but to all passengers on the flight. The statement had also been posted on the airline's official website. Official statement. TAISH, Global Horizons Airlines. "We at Global Horizons Airlines extend our deepest apologies to Ms. Amara Davis and to all passengers on Flight 204 from New York to Milan. We acknowledge that there were serious errors in the handling of the situation on board, and we are committed to taking the necessary steps to ensure this does not happen again. Effective immediately, we are launching a mandatory sensitivity and diversity training program for all employees. Additionally, a comprehensive investigation is underway to determine accountability and improve our processes for handling passenger complaints. We pledge to act with full transparency and will provide regular updates on the progress of these initiatives. We understand that no apology can undo the harm caused, but we hope this marks the beginning of restoring trust with Ms. Davis and all of our valued customers." Amara read every word of the letter carefully, her eyes lingering on the lines of commitment. She didn't know if these promises would actually lead to action, but at the very least, this was a first step. She picked up her phone and sent a quick message to Maya. "Keep close tabs on them. I want to make sure every single one of these promises is followed through." As night fell, Amara stood on the balcony of her hotel room, gazing out over the dazzling lights of Milan. For a moment, her mind felt a little lighter as she thought about tomorrow's show. Her collection wasn't just about fashion, it was about telling stories, empowering others, and reshaping how people viewed beauty. Maybe, she thought, this battle on the plane was just the beginning of something bigger. She took a deep breath, letting the crisp Milan air soothe her, before turning back inside to prepare for the important day ahead. Every door to change starts with courage. Open yours, even if you're unsure of what lies on the other side, because sometimes it's you who will make the difference. Did Amara's story inspire you? Hit like if you connected with her journey and subscribe to stay tuned for the next chapters. The morning in Milan was as radiant as ever, with soft golden sunlight reflecting off the glass windows of the city's luxury buildings. The honking of car horns, the hurried footsteps, and the mingling voices of people speaking in multiple languages brought the city's unstoppable rhythm to life. Amara woke early, as she always did before important days. But today, the usual excitement she felt before a fashion show was tempered by a lingering heaviness. The events on the flight still clung to her mind, like a storm cloud refusing to dissipate completely. She sat at the desk in her elegant hotel room, her iPad in front of her. Scrolling through her emails, she responded to a few messages from sponsors and collaborators. But her eyes stopped when she saw a new email from Maya Green. Subject: update from the airline. Amara. The airline's leadership team has sent their first progress report. Laura Bennett has been suspended, and they've initiated mandatory sensitivity and diversity training for the flight crew. They're also requesting our collaboration to build a comprehensive report on what happened and the corrective actions being implemented. I think we can use this as an opportunity to push for more permanent policies. I've reached out to a few experts in this field to help support the process. I genuinely believe this is a chance to drive real change. Attached to this email, you'll find their preliminary report along with some notes I've added. We'll need to go over everything in more detail later this weekend. Maya. Amara read every word carefully, feeling a mix of cautious satisfaction and guarded skepticism. She knew Maya was right. This was a chance to push for deeper, more meaningful change. But she also recognized the possibility that the airline might simply be making temporary gestures to appease public scrutiny. She pressed the call button on her phone and waited as the line connected to Maya. Maya, does their report hold up? Amara asked as soon as Maya's voice came through. It's convincing to a degree, Maya replied. But I think it's missing one critical element: oversight. Without a clear oversight process and specific timelines, all of these commitments are just empty promises. Amara nodded. Even though Maya couldn't see her, agreed. We'll demand an independent oversight team and regular progress reports. I don't want them to think for a second that I'm going to let this slide. Maya chuckled lightly. You've never let anything slide, Amara. Amara smiled at the remark. But her mind remained consumed with plans and next steps. After the call, Amara spent the rest of her morning focusing on work. Her team had already arrived at the show venue, a historic theater transformed into a dazzling space for her fashion event. When Amara entered the grand hall, the air was buzzing with activity. Models practiced their walks on the runway, their heels clicking against the wooden floor as soft, ambient lighting filled the space. Each piece in the collection was the result of months of relentless creativity. Every stitch, every fabric choice carried its own story. For Amara, fashion was never just about beauty. It was about storytelling, telling the stories of those who had been overlooked, of dreams pushed to the margins, and of hope for a more equitable world. As she reviewed each garment, checking the details meticulously, her thoughts returned to her experience on the flight. An idea began to form in her mind: what if I could turn what happened into part of the story I'm telling through this collection? As Amara finished her final review of the collection, her phone buzzed on the table. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. She hesitated for a moment before answering. This is Amara Davis. MS. Davis, it's Laura Bennett. Amara froze for a second, then quickly composed herself. Laura, what can I do for you? Laura's voice on the other end was hesitant but carried a note of sincerity. I just wanted to say that I'm truly sorry for what happened. I know my apology probably doesn't mean much to you, but I felt like I needed to say it. Amara remained silent for a moment. You're looking for my forgiveness, aren't you? No, Laura replied, her voice trembling slightly. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that what I did was wrong and I'm trying to make it right. Amara listened, sensing the honesty in Laura's tone, but her voice stayed calm and firm. Making it right isn't just about apologizing, Laura. It's about what you do after this. If you truly want to change, I hope you'll learn from this and use what you've learned to help others. I understand, Laura said softly. Thank you for listening. When the call ended, Amara set her phone down on the desk, an unfamiliar feeling stirring within her. Laura's apology didn't erase the harm that had been done, but it was at least a small sign of awakening. That night, as Amara stood in her hotel room, she took a few moments to reflect on everything that had unfolded. The incident on the flight, the meeting with the airline's leadership, Laura's apology, it was all beginning to weave together into a larger narrative she wanted to share. She opened the small notebook she always carried with her and began to write. Change doesn't come from empty apologies. It comes from action, from learning, and from recognizing that every mistake is an opportunity to grow. If we don't use these experiences to create something better, then they are meaningless. She set the pen down, feeling just a little lighter. The next day, Milan was alive with the electrifying energy typical of Fashion Week. The streets were vibrant with striking outfits as designers, models, and media figures bustled between events. But for Amara, today wasn't just another fashion show, it was an opportunity to transform what she had experienced into a powerful message, a statement that went beyond the runway. Backstage, Amara's team worked tirelessly. Models were prepped with flawless makeup, sleek hairstyles, and dressed in the striking designs that defined her collection. Amara stood in the middle of it all, her sharp eyes scanning every detail, every stitch. She knew that today wasn't just about fashion. It was about the story she was about to tell, and she planned to tell it in a way no one expected. An assistant approached, placing a small microphone in Amara's hand. "Are you sure you want to speak before the show starts?" Amara nodded firmly. "I don't just want to, I need to. This is the right moment." She glanced at the runway, where soft lights bathed the space in a golden glow, highlighting the anticipation in the air. Each piece in her collection wasn't just about beauty, it was about diversity, about the power of presence, and the strength to demand change. One gown floated like clouds, its fabric light and ethereal. A tailored suit with bold, angular cuts celebrated the power and strength and femininity. And at the center of it all was a floor-length statement coat, embroidered with delicate silver threads spelling out words in multiple languages: respect, equality, dignity. Amara's gaze lingered on the coat, and a faint smile touched her lips. It wasn't just the standout piece of her collection, it was the heart of the story she wanted to tell. As the minutes ticked by, the seats in the grand hall filled with guests. Fashion editors, journalists, prominent bloggers, and major sponsors took their places. The energy in the room crackled with anticipation. Everyone knew that Amara Davis's collections always came with a surprise, and this year the buzz around her show was stronger than ever. Amara stepped out from backstage, walking to the podium near the start of the runway. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd as she appeared, but no one spoke too loudly. All eyes were on her. She stood before the microphone, her gaze sweeping across the room. All the lights dimmed, leaving only a soft spotlight illuminating her, creating a moment heavy with significance. "Thank you all for being here today," Amara began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "The collection you're about to witness is not just a work of art, it's a story about hope, resilience, and the right to belong." She paused, letting her words settle in the air, allowing the weight of them to reach every person in the audience. "Just a few days ago, I experienced something I know is all too familiar for many people, a moment where I had to prove my worth in a space where I already belonged." Soft murmurs rippled through the crowd. The audience realized she was speaking about something deeply personal, something that mattered. "This isn't just about me," Amara continued, her voice growing stronger. "It's about everyone who has ever been made to feel small, who has ever been forced to confront biases simply because they didn't look or act like what others expected." Amara lifted her head, her eyes shining with conviction, her presence commanding. "But here's my answer to that: I will not stay silent. And this collection is proof that we don't need to change to fit into someone else's mold. The world needs to change to embrace all of us." Scattered applause broke out, growing quickly into a roaring wave that filled the hall. The show began, and each piece that graced the runway became part of Amara's story. The first design symbolized the journey of existence: soft, ethereal gowns that seemed to float like whispers of hope, reminding the audience that we all start from the simplest truth: the right to exist. As the collection progressed, the designs grew bolder, fiercer, with sharp cuts and commanding materials. They reflected strength, individuality, and the power to take up space unapologetically. Amara's message was clear: no one has the right to make you feel like you need permission to exist. And then, the finale: an opulent floor-length statement coat with the words respect, equality, dignity embroidered in silver thread made its entrance. It was worn by a stunning African model with a stride so regal, she seemed to radiate confidence and defiance. The room fell silent for a brief moment, the weight of the moment palpable, before the audience erupted into thunderous applause and cheers. When the show ended, Amara walked out onto the runway to take her bow, met with a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. But it wasn't just applause she received. As she stepped off the runway, a few journalists approached her, eager for a statement. "Ms. Davis," one reporter asked, "I understand your speech was inspired by a recent incident. Could you elaborate on that?" Amara looked directly into the camera, a confident smile on her face. "I don't think there's anything more to say. This collection says it all." As the crowd began to disperse, leaving the venue abuzz with conversation, Amara returned backstage. Her team surrounded her, congratulating her on a spectacular show. Maya was there too, her smile wide and bright. "You didn't just create fashion tonight, Amara. You made a statement." Amara nodded, pride swelling in her chest. But she knew her work wasn't over. "This is only the beginning," she said, her gaze focused on the horizon ahead. "We still have so much more to do." Later that evening, After the show, Amara returned to her hotel room. The echoes of the lively crowd, the thunderous applause, and the dazzling stage lights still lingered in her mind. But now, the room was unusually quiet. Only the soft sound of the wind blowing outside the balcony and the glow of Milan's city lights reflecting off the glass window broke the silence. She slipped off her high heels, sank into a chair, and opened her iPad. Messages and emails poured in relentlessly, like a tidal wave crashing into her inbox. One email from a renowned fashion journalist caught her attention. Amara, today's show wasn't just about fashion. You created a historic moment. Your designs weren't just beautiful, they carried a strength that cannot be ignored. Your story has changed how we see fashion and its true purpose. Amara read it, warmth spreading through her chest. But this was just one of many messages and articles praising her show. Maya, always efficient, had already sent her a summary. Amara, your speech and collection are making waves on social media. The hashtag #RespectAndDignity is now trending worldwide. Major news outlets are picking up the story of your flight experience. There's already pressure mounting for other airlines to review their policies. Amara read the message, a strange yet familiar feeling washing over her. This was no longer just about her, it had grown into something much bigger, a movement she hadn't anticipated. In the middle of the stream of messages and emails, a call came in from an unknown number. Amara stared at the screen for a moment before deciding to answer. Ms. Davis, good evening. This is Mark Reynolds, CEO of Global Horizons Airlines. Amara furrowed her brow slightly. I'm listening. Mark's voice carried a tone of caution but also seriousness. First, let me congratulate you on your show today. I watched the live stream, and I must say, it was extraordinary. Thank you, Amara replied evenly. But I doubt you called just to discuss fashion. Mark sighed. No, you're absolutely right. I'm calling to update you on what we've been doing. Since our meeting in Milan, I've personally overseen the rollout of our sensitivity and diversity training program. Additionally, we've established an independent committee to review our complaint handling procedures and address discrimination. That's a good start, Amara replied, her tone still sharp. But I hope you understand that this isn't just about one airline. This is an opportunity to set a new standard for the entire industry. You're absolutely right, Mark said, his voice lowering. And that's why I want to invite you to join this committee as a special advisor. We need people like you, those who aren't afraid to speak the truth and push for real change. Amara remained silent for a moment, considering his offer. She knew this was a significant opportunity to push for transformation from within. I'll think about it, she said finally, not committing just yet. But if I agree, I need to ensure that my voice will be heard and that action will actually follow. You'll have that. I promise, Mark said. Elsewhere in Milan, Laura Bennett was packing up her belongings in her small rental apartment. After being suspended from her role at the airline, she had decided to step away from the job for a while and join a nonprofit organization specializing in diversity and inclusion. Laura knew the road ahead would not be easy. She had much to unlearn, not just about how she treated others, but also about how she saw herself. One of the first steps she had taken was writing a handwritten letter to Amara. Dear Ms. Davis, I'm writing this letter not to ask for forgiveness, but to thank you. What you said to me on that flight and during your show today has made me realize many things. I allowed unconscious biases to guide my actions, and that is unacceptable. I'm working to make amends, not just to become a better person, but to ensure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else. I hope that, one day, I can contribute in some small way to the movement you're leading. Sincerely. Momi, Laura Bennett. When Amara returned from the fashion show, she found a letter from Laura slipped under her hotel room door. She read it carefully, taking in each line. Amara wasn't sure if Laura had truly changed. But at the very least, this was a promising sign, a reminder that change doesn't always happen instantly. It often comes in small, slow, but deliberate steps. Folding the letter, Amara placed it in her bag and told herself that no matter how long the road ahead might be, she would keep moving forward. In the days that followed, Amara's fashion show and the incident on the flight became the focus of widespread media attention. Other airlines began announcing new training programs. Some even reached out to Amara, seeking her guidance. The hashtag #RespectAndDignity continued to trend, growing into a symbol for a larger movement not just in aviation but across multiple industries. Amara received invitations from major conferences, television programs, and even international organizations. But instead of rushing to accept everything, She carefully chose the platforms where she knew her voice could make the most meaningful impact. One quiet evening in Milan, Amara sat by the window of her hotel room, gazing at the sparkling city lights. She picked up her notebook and wrote these final lines. Change doesn't happen in a day, and it's never easy. But every action, every word, every step, no matter how small, has the power to create a ripple. And I will keep stepping forward, not just for myself, but for everyone who hasn't had the chance to speak up. She closed her notebook and leaned back in her chair, feeling a rare sense of calm wash over her. This journey was far from over, but it had already sparked the first crucial steps that could change a system, an industry, and perhaps even the world. Amara Davis is not just a woman who fought for fairness for herself, she is a symbol for millions of others who have been judged by bias rather than their true worth. Her story reminds us that change begins with speaking up, with believing that we deserve respect, and with fighting for that, not just for ourselves, but for our communities. If Amara's story inspired you, help amplify this message by hitting like, subscribe, and share with those who need to hear it. Let your small actions contribute to a larger change, a world that is fairer, kinder, and filled with dignity. Together, we can make it happen.